Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Disruptive Leadership series. Today, we will be discussing cognitive diversity. Great minds do not think alike. My name is Brianna Jones, and I am the Assistant Director here at the Leadership Institute. We're glad that you're spending this time with us today, and we hope that that this webinar will be interactive for you all throughout. So make sure that you are using the chat feature to drop any questions or feedback that you have about the webinar. I'll pause Dreesy throughout to jump in and take questions from the audience. And why don't you all go ahead and type in the chat and let us know if this is your first Disruptive Leadership webinar or if you've attended one in the past. And I would definitely like to know which ones you have attended in the past. Today's facilitator will be Dreesy Thomas. She is our instructor/facilitator, and Dreesy provides leadership development to our faculty and staff at CSU, as well as outside Leadership Institute clients. She is certified in Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, popularly known as MBTI, and Emergenetics. Thomas completed her undergraduate and graduate studies at Columbus State University, and prior to coming to the Leadership Institute, Dreesy worked in student affairs, working as a student development specialist and special events coordinator. Welcome, Dreesy.
Thank you so much, Bree. Can you hear me, Bree? Just want to make sure my sound is good.
Gotcha.
Okay, great. All right. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Dreesy Thomas, and I'm excited to be here with you all today to talk about cognitive diversity. So the title of this session is Great Minds Do Not Think Alike. And so what we're about to do is chat about the various preferences of how people think. And there are 4 distinct preferences that we're going to talk about today. Some of you all maybe have heard of assessments such as Myers-Briggs, like Brianna just mentioned, such as DISC, where the information that I will be sharing today is based off of what is called emergenetics. So this may be familiar information to some of you and new information to others of you, but all in all, I hope that you all are able to get valuable takeaways from this. And so when we look at emergenetics, what emergenetics looks at is the patterns of thinking that we as human beings carry with us, as well as our genetic blueprint and our life experiences. So that's oftentimes how we get these thinking preferences that we're going to be discussing today. And when we look at emergenetics, it is scientifically formulated and has strong reliability and validity as well. So this is going to be some awesome information that I'm going to be sharing with you all. And let us know in the chat if you ever heard of emergenetics before, and Brianna will share that with me once we pause for questions. So first thing I want to share with you all, I want you to pick one list of words that you most identify with. One list of words that you most identify with. So again, pick one list of words that you most identify with. I'm just giving you all a few seconds to do that. And if it feels tough for you to do, it's because most of us in the human population do have 2 to 3 thinking preferences. So it may feel a little tough, and that's why, because you may feel like you're tugging between 1 or 2 other lists. But pick one list of words that you most identify with. And Brianna, if you can let me know what we're getting in the chat. So let me know if you're seeing blue, yellow, green, red.
Hey, Dreesy, we have no colors right now. No one has entered their colors in the chat.
Okay. So what I'm going to do, again, these are based off of the 4 thinking preferences that I'm about to go a little bit more in depth about. And so what you will see in these next few slides are the colors that associate with each thinking preference. So again, the next slide you're going to see is going to be analytical thinking, and you'll see that it says blue in parentheses. And so I want you to just, as we're going through each one of these thinking preferences, I want you to be able to think back and say, okay, the blue list was analytical thinking, and so on and so forth. So anytime that we do get those, Brianna, you just let me know. So again, we're just picking.
If you don't mind me cutting in, I'm sorry. We do have one blue and one red.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go in depth through each thinking preference so that we can kind of get a little bit more information. So at any point, if you feel like you need to switch your thinking preferences, that maybe is the one that most you identify with the most, then feel free to do so. Going through these more in depth can kind of help you out to say, is this my number one? Maybe I should switch to something else. And so the first one that we'll start with is analytical thinking. Again, this was the list in blue. So the key question for analytical thinkers is, where's the research? Analytical thinking is logical, elegant, abstract, quantifiable. The analytical mind learns by mental analysis. The analytical mind likes rational problem solving, inventing systems that incorporate necessary details, and they predominantly think or may come off to others as denying emotion. So they may deny emotion, or they may come across as denying emotion. And as I go through these slides, what I should be saying is the analytical thinker may learn by mental analysis, because I never want to box anyone in. But generally speaking, these tend to be the facts for those who are analytical thinkers or have analytical thinking as their primary or their number one. So the question here is, does this sound like you? I like to review new technology. I make most of my decisions based on rigorous analysis, and I like to have reading material prior to any class, lecture, or meeting I'm attending. So again, the question is, does this sound like you? And if it sounds like you a little bit, then this means that it may be one of your preferences, right? Because again, most of us as human beings have 2 to 3 preferences. A little bit more about analytical thinkers are that they can come off as being those natural skeptics. If you've ever worked with someone on a team that comes across as being a natural skeptic, rational, their motto is, in God we trust, all others bring data. So again, in God we trust, all others bring data is their motto. So this was the analytical thinker, and again, this was the list in blue. Next, we have structural thinking. This is our list in green. And so structural thinkers, their key question is, how can I apply this? Structural thinking is methodical, conservative, thorough, and practical. The structural mind learns by doing. The structural mind likes following procedures and planning workable solutions. And the predominantly structural thinker may appear to lack imagination. So that's how they can typically come across to another person, as appearing to lack imagination. So here's our question again. Does this sound like you? Those who maybe would mark the green list as their preference. 1, I would like a job with a lot of rules and regulations. 2, I prefer it when others speak in specific terms. And 3, I like planning tasks to meet an objective. So if this sounds like you, then most likely either structural thinking is your number 1, or it could be in your top 2 or 3. So a little bit more about structural thinkers are they're thorough. They are the people who typically can create that order out of chaos. They are hands-on learners, and their motto is, of course I don't look busy, I did it right the first time. So, okay, we've gone through analytical thinking, we've gone through structural thinking, and now we have social thinking. So this was our list in red. So the key question here is, how do I feel about this? Social thinking is personalized, empathetic, and intuitive. The social mind learns by being shown and being involved in the process. The social mind likes team building and taking care of others. And lastly, the predominantly social thinker may come across as being too emotional. So here's our question. Does this sound like you? I like building the self-esteem of people I meet. I really care about my coworkers, colleagues, and clients. and I pick up on the vibrations of people around me. A little bit more about social thinkers. They are socially sensitive. They are intuitive about people, and they prefer to work with others. Their motto is, I am intuitively aware of those around me. So again, this was our list in red. And lastly, we're going to go to our list in yellow. These are our conceptual thinkers. So these are the ones who are more intuitive about ideas. So our social thinkers are intuitive about people. Conceptual thinkers are intuitive about ideas. So the key question here is, what's the concept here and where can I go with it? Conceptual thinking is creative, intuitive, holistic, and unusual. The conceptual mind learns by experimenting. The conceptual mind likes shaking things up, thinking outside the box, and seeing the big picture. And the predominantly conceptual thinker may come across as being too far, quote unquote, out there. So does this sound like you? I see new projects as new opportunities. I search for new ways to solve old problems, and I have a clear vision of where my industry should go. A few other things. They are future oriented. Again, they love the big picture. They are experimenters. They are globally focused. And then again, they are intuitive about ideas. And their motto is, I feel like I am diagonally parked in a parallel universe. So again, we have talked about these 4 preferences, which is part of our objectives today. One of the things we're going to do is talk about these 4 preferences a little bit deeper. And then we're going to go into ways that we can close the intent impact gap that can be formed from cognitive diversity in the way that we all think or prefer to think as humans, right? So if we come to a table, we may have different variations of thinking preferences, right? We may have someone who's social and conceptual. We may have someone sitting across from them who's analytical and structural. And so that's what creates this cognitive diversity. And that's what creates what we're going to also discuss as the intent impact gap, which can create a lot of tension and a lot of conflict, whether in our personal or professional lives. And so after we go through that intent impact gap piece, then we're going to talk about ways that we can minimize and close that gap, and solutions and ways that we can communicate with those who do not have the same thinking preference as us. So Bree, I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions.
Yes, Tracy, we do have one question from Robert. He asks, are structural thinkers heavily task-oriented, and that is why they could be perceived as standoffish?
So it really depends on the social thinkers variety. So one thing that, I'm getting ahead, sorry. One thing that I do want to mention is that when we're talking about our thinking preferences, right? Again, I did say that most of us have 2 to 3 thinking preferences. So when we look at percentages for my analytical thinkers, you will enjoy this. But in the human population, those who have 2 thinking preferences are 12 to 15% of us. Those who have 3 are less than 12%. Those who have 1 are less than 6%, and those who have all 4 are 1%. So it depends on the person, right? Let's say that structural thinking is their number 1. And then let's say that analytical thinking or conceptual thinking or social thinking is their number 2. There are times that, yes, this person may come across as being more task oriented, but let's say that their social or their structural thinking is number 1 and their social thinking is number 2. There are times that it probably could be hard to tell that this person is structural because social is also one of their preferences as well. So it all depends on if this person is bimodal, having 2 thinking preferences, or let's say they're unimodal. What if they just have structural thinking as their thinking preference and none of the other 3 fall in their thinking preference? So that would make them what's called a unimodal thinker. So if we do find someone who's a unimodal thinker and who happens to be a structural thinker, then I am quite sure that, yes, they probably would come off as being very heavily task-oriented versus if they were a bimodal or trimodal thinker. I hope that makes sense, Brianna. Let me know if it does, if they're saying anything in the chat.
Yes, Tracy, that makes perfect sense, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So again, we talked about the 4 thinking preferences. So we have analytical, structural, social, and conceptual. Then remember that all of us in this world, we could either be unimodal thinkers, bimodal, trimodal, or quadrimodal. So that's just, do we have one thinking preference? Do we have two? Do we have three, or do we have four? So those are the names as it pertains to those who have one thinking preference, all the way up to those who have all four, the quadrimodal thinking preferences. So these were the four thinking preferences. And again, when we bring all of this to the table, it can lead to what is called the intent impact gap. And so one thing that I want to discuss is a little bit about what that gap is, and then I'm going to pull up a scenario for you all to read through with me, so that we can just see a really good example of how the intent impact gap can help in the workplace. But hopefully you'll be able to take some of these takeaways to your personal life as well. So when we talk about the intent impact gap, the intent is the way people perceive their own actions. The impact is the way others interpret those actions, right? So if you've ever been in a conversation where you felt as though, but I said A, B, C, and D, it might not have registered to the other person. They may have received it in a totally different way than what you intended for them to receive it. And then that's where we have that gap. So Emergenetics, a blog from Emergenetics, defines this intent impact gap is what occurs when our words or actions are misinterpreted by another individual. And so here are some of the ways that we can reduce the impact gap, intent impact gap, and it's removing that judgment, understanding ourselves more, so greater self-awareness, and then considering how we can flex and build skill. So again, removing judgment, understanding ourselves, so there's that self-awareness piece, and then lastly, considering how we can flex and build skill. We're going to go through these a little bit more in depth, but what I want to do right now is to share with you all a little bit more of, like I said, that example in that scenario, so that you can see what this really sounds like and looks like. And so when we're looking at the intent impact gap, this can create tension, it can create conflict, it can lower productivity and trust, right, in the workplace or even in relationships in our personal life as well. And so when trust is there, of course, trust is not there, of course, that productivity level is going to decrease. And so having an intent impact gap has some really serious impact on the workplace, right? And on our personal life as well. So I know that we all have created goals and things that we want to succeed in as a team on our jobs, as organizations, as corporations. And so really understanding how minimizing that intent impact gap can allow us to increase more trust in the workplace, which directly relates to our productivity. I think we all would say we want that, right, in our workplace. We want to be able to crush our goals and to not have anything hinder our productivity and us meeting our goals each year. So let's get into, let's see, in slideshow. All right, Bree, am I out? Okay, so now I am going to pull back up this blog for you all so that we can read it together. There we are. And bear with me, you all. Okay, so let's read a little bit about the intent impact gap here. So I'm going to read it along with you all. Some of you all may need to just read it for yourselves. I'm going to read it out loud. Do what you need to do, and then we will discuss overall. So consider this story here. Sarah is the director of learning and development, and then she has a direct report, Chris, who is a program manager. So they are assessing their list of priority projects and need to decide whether to focus on restructuring their onboarding program or reevaluating their learning management system, LMS for short. So together they decide to reevaluate their LMS, and each team member takes away their marching orders, okay? So the following week, after Chris has made significant progress on his responsibilities, Sarah comes back after conversations with other departments and reports that onboarding will be the priority going forward. So we have a change here. Immediately, Chris's demeanor changes. He begins asking lots of questions about what caused the change, why should onboarding be their top priority, and if this decision is going to change again. So after this exchange, Sarah starts to question Chris's attitude. Meanwhile, Chris is wondering if Sarah can stick to her commitments. This here is the perfect example of an intent impact gap. So just to tell you a little bit more as they're explaining this, you see here that in this scenario, Sarah intends to pick a project that will have the most positive impact on the company. And so she's having further conversations with other colleagues, and she realizes that we need to go another route. However, you know, we have that you see that this may be negatively impacting Chris. He's not trying to be difficult. He's just trying to understand the why, right? Why this change occurred. So let me pull up their profiles. I'm going to stop sharing here. And I'm going to pull up their emergenetics profiles, which is going to give us a really good idea of what's going on here. It's all going to make sense soon, so bear with me as I try to get this presentation back up. Okay. Let's see.
Tracy and Robert says, thank you. I'm curious to know what other preferences I might have. So it sounded like Robert isn't a unimodal.
Okay, perfect. And if they have any more questions, Bree, you let me know, because I definitely want to be able to answer all of them as we go along. So you just let me know.
Okay.
Okay, so again, we're going to go through their profiles now. So we have Sarah and we have Chris. Now you're seeing their profiles. This is them as if they were to take emergenetics. And I'll explain kind of what we're looking at more so towards the end, because what you all just did, you actually self-selected. But if you were actually going to take the emergenetics profile, you would get something that looks like this, right? So you're seeing those familiar colors that we saw on the list, such as the blue, the green, the yellows, and the reds. That still stands for the analytical, the conceptual, the social, and the structural. So as you're seeing here, Sarah's profile, her two thinking preference is social and conceptual. So you see that large amount of that yellow and that red. She's a social and conceptual thinker. So we see that Chris is pretty much the opposite. He's an analytical and structural thinker, right? We see a lot of that blue and we see a lot of that green. So when we're looking at, analytical thinkers, they want to ask this question, why? So that probably makes more sense as to why Chris is saying, but, why are we changing and are we going to change again? He needs to know the facts, right? He needs to know the logic behind this. He needs to know the rational thinking behind this. And as we see here, Sarah, she's a big picture thinker. So she's looking at this big picture. So when we're looking at this intent impact gap, we can see here how Chris can probably get bogged down with the details. And then we can also see how Sarah is such a big picture thinker, with being a conceptual thinker, that she's really looking at the big picture and what's best for the overall team, what's best for the overall organization. One thing about emergenetics is that it doesn't just look at thinking preferences, but it does look at behavioral attributes as well. So it looks at thinking attributes, and then it looks at behavioral attributes. This is what you see in purple. Of course, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this portion because I really want to zone in on the thinking preferences, but one of the 3 behavior attributes that emergenetics looks at is flexibility. So you'll see here that Sarah is 95. In emergenetics world, we call that third flexibility, which means that she is open to change. She welcomes change. Changing a decision does not bother her at all. It's nothing to her. Chris, on the other hand, you see for flexibility, he is a 26. And so here we call that third flexibility. And so he prefers to stay firm and focused with a decision. He does not really welcome change. If a team comes together like him and Sarah did and they decide this is what we're going to do, he's going to start working on it. He's going to start making sure that he is dotting his I's, he's crossing his T's. Changes to him, as you can see, can kind of cause a little irritation and allow him to have a lot of questions. So Taking psychometric assessments such as emergenetics can really help when we're talking about understanding one another and then understanding ourselves. So remember beforehand here, I talked about the reducing the intent impact gap and ways that we could do that. So one is removing that judgment, right? Two is understanding ourselves, and three is considering how we can flex and build skill. So let's start with removing judgment. So, rarely at work, things aren't personal, right? It's just about what is the best process, protocol, what is the best vision for our goal, for us to meet our goal, for us to succeed. And that's what Sarah was doing, right? She was trying to select the best option that she felt was going to lead the team, lead the organization in the best direction. And she just so happened to have to change that and tweak that decision. So if Sarah removed her judgment that Chris wasn't a team player, she might understand that he is just that analytical thinker, that structural thinker, and he needs those details, and he likes to stay firm and focused in his decision. And if Chris removed his judgment, he would realize that it's not that his boss can't make commitments. She's just looking at that big picture view, and she's realizing that they may need to take a new direction that's a more healthy direction for the team, and really just calmly ask why and try to be as flexible as he can in making that change as well. So removing that judgment, right? Because a lot of times when we remove that judgment, we're able to see what this person prefers, how they navigate through life, right? What their personality preferences are, their thinking preferences are, and then we're able to better understand one another. So saying that they took this emergenetics profile, if they were to look at one another's, they would be able to remove that judgment and really understand each other, right? Understand why Chris is asking all of these questions and understand why Sarah is kind of taking aback at the fact that Chris is asking all of these questions. Next, it's understanding ourselves. So this is self-awareness. So if Chris knows, okay, I am 26 in flexibility, I understand that things are going to happen, right? I need to be maybe a little bit more open to change if it comes, right? Step outside of that comfort zone, which we're going to talk about in this next slide, and really understand that although I don't prefer all of these changes, I do realize that they have to come along, right? And then the same thing with Sarah. She's open to change, but realizing that others may not be as open to change as she is. So maybe when she's coming to present information to her team, making sure that those I's are dotted and those T's are crossed for her analytical and structural thinkers, okay? So understanding yourself, self-awareness, that's where assessments such as Myers-Briggs and DISC and emergenetics and so on and so forth can really help you, but can really help your team as well as you all begin to understand each other's profiles. Lastly, consider how you can flex and build skill. So this is what I meant about Chris stepping outside of his preference. So although Chris is an analytical and structural thinker, there are going to be times where he may need to operate in that social and conceptual world. Same thing for Sarah. There are times where she may need to operate in that analytical and analytical and structural world. So although thinking preferences may not be our preference, we still need to know as effective employees and as effective human beings and leaders how to flex and build skill and hop into those worlds and those different preferences if we need to. So again, ways that we can minimize that intent impact gap is one, removing judgment, two, understanding ourselves, so that greater self-awareness, and three, considering how we can flex and build skill. So let's go into this idea of flexing and building skill, which what we call in the emergenetics world is embracing the scratchy. It's the same thing as flexing and building skill, but we call this embracing the scratchy. So scratchy means when we feel uncomfortable due to utilizing areas that are not our strengths. So here are a few pictures here that I think can really help you all in terms of communication strategies, communication tips. And you'll see here the one on the left says what makes each attribute feel scratchy. The one on the right says how to embrace the scratchy for each thinking attribute. So let's start with the picture on the left. What makes each attribute feel scratchy? So for analytical thinkers, they will likely be uncomfortable moving forward without knowledge of the objectives or the goal and the data supporting it. So again, they need those objectives, they need the data, they need rational, logical presentation when they're getting information. So if they don't have that, they're going to probably feel a little bit uncomfortable. Our conceptual thinkers will likely need to be connected to remember that big picture. They may be uncomfortable feeling constrained by limits set on the goal. So they need that big picture. If you're giving conceptual thinkers too many details, they're probably going to feel a little bit uncomfortable. Social thinkers will likely need to see how the goal will affect others. Remember that they're very intuitive about people. They may feel uncomfortable if they don't have a chance to connect with other people to discuss the goal. Lastly, structural thinkers. So they will likely need to set plans and guidelines. If we're dealing with a structural thinker, set plans and guidelines. They may feel uncomfortable without procedures to achieve the goal, without outlines, without something just really outlining and telling them the details of an upcoming project. They're going to feel uncomfortable if they feel like they're missing the details and they're missing the structure. So that's what makes each attribute feel scratchy. Again, this is awesome information to know so that you can know how to interact and present information to those who may be in a whole nother world than you, or in other words, they have a whole different thinking preference than you. Next, we have how to embrace the scratchy. So for instance, for an analytical thinker, the analytical brain may need to know about, may need to look at the social aspect, So when we're looking at this circle, for them to embrace the scratchy, they need to look at the opposite. So the analytical will need to jump into the social world. The social thinker will need to jump into the analytical world. The structural thinker may need to jump into the conceptual world, and then the conceptual thinker will need to jump into the structural world. So it says here, the analytical brain may think about how this change has been beneficial rather than focusing on the data. Access the social brain to think about the human element and try to accept the change without having supporting data. So again, analytical thinkers want that data, but if they don't have it, this is telling them step into that social world and see maybe how it's affecting people. Same thing with the social brain. So the social brain may think about people instead of the differences in this change may make maybe in profits, right? So with the analytical brain, look at the change from a rational perspective and try to accept the change without being too emotional. And you'll see the same thing here for conceptual and structural. So it says the conceptual brain may think about the details and logistics involved in this change, but go to the structural brain to figure out steps for implementing this change and try to accept the change without thinking about the larger vision. So if the conceptual thinker does not have their big picture vision, they need to step into that structural world and maybe look at the details there. For that structural thinker, they may look at the long-term payoff of this change. They need to go to the conceptual brain to see the big picture, because sometimes structural thinkers can be so bogged down in details. Going in to see that big picture can really help them, and they need to try to accept the change without knowing the logistics and without knowing the details. So again, building that skill, being able to flex when you need to is very important, because again, our thinking preference is not the end all be all. We have so many other people who have different variations, different preferences, and we need to know how to communicate with one another. So this can really help with relationships. It can really help with us just developing our leadership skills and our just people skills in general. And then of course, when we're looking at embracing the scratchy, which also helps to close that intent impact gap, then we're looking at more productivity and a higher level of trust. And of course, who doesn't want that in their workplace? So let me show you some of the other or one of the other impacts of embracing the scratchy, and it's talking about Blockbuster Video. So we probably all remember Blockbuster Video from back in the day. They had so many opportunities to adapt to this changing technology world, but never did. And so a very, very disgruntled customer who was so over the late fees left Blockbuster, stopped buying Blockbuster, stopped being a consumer of Blockbuster, and created their own company, which is now known as Netflix. And so I'm sure all of us know how popular Netflix is. It is one of the platforms that probably got us all through 2020 and even now 2021. And so embracing the scratchy can really link us to the livelihood of our company, right? The livelihood of our organization. As we now know, Netflix is way more popular No one is really even talking about or thinking about Blockbuster Video that much. But they had many opportunities to adapt to this new technology that was occurring, but they didn't embrace the scratchy, right? They didn't step outside of their preference and really see how they could navigate from how the world was changing to how people, what people were desiring. And so it allowed them to, their organization to get less popular, sales to go down. And now we see that things like Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime are things that are really popular right now. And I do believe that if Blockbuster would have taken the time to really try to adapt, they may have, you know, been here today and may have been higher on the list and more popular to us as consumers. So this was about what makes each attribute feel scratchy. This was about how to embrace the scratchy.
And then I have a question.
Yeah.
As far as a structural person myself, how do I embrace the scratchy in the workplace or just on an everyday basis? How can I approach embracing the scratchy?
So I think tools like this, resources like this will help too, trying to find ways that you can talk to or step into the world that maybe is not your typical world. So stepping into a thinking preference that is not your typical thinking preference. And so, you know, really looking at what each thinking preference desires. So structural thinker is going to want the details. The social thinker is going to be thinking about the people involved and the feeling involved. Conceptual thinkers are looking at the big pictures, the ideas, brainstorming, experimenting. Analytical thinkers are looking at that data, rational, logical, objectives kind of thing. So once we see what each thinking preference desires, then we need to be able to switch our language to that might be more appealing or eye-catching or even ear-catching to them, right? So I would say trying to switch up your vocabulary, switch up your language. Let's say if you know you're about to talk to an analytical thinker. So if you're a social thinker, you're totally thinking about people and feelings. So you're probably always saying, how do you feel about this? Or who's gonna be involved? Who are the people that are gonna be involved? Who's gonna be affected? The analytical thinker, this sounds bad, not that they don't care about people, but they are not thinking about people, right? So your lingo is not really attractive to them or it's not catching their attention. You might want to say to them, okay, Brianna, you know, how do you think the data will be affected? How will profits be affected, right? How much money do we have now? And how much will we have after this project, right? What is our rational thinking, our rational goals? What is our objectives? What are we trying to do here that's going to allow us to increase profits? Let's sit down and look at the data. And data may be so icky to you. You may be like, I can't stand data. But again, right, it's getting outside of yourself, switching your lingo and your language and trying to attract them. For a conceptual thinker, you want to talk to them about things that are future oriented. So saying things like, oh my gosh, if you're a part of this project, it's going to make a huge difference on this community, on this campus. If it's something globally focused, it can probably say something like, think about what this can do for our kids in the future, right? Think about those who maybe are in elementary school, the project that we're doing. Think about how this can help them when they're in college. They're globally focused, future focused, or sitting down with them and saying, okay, let's sit down and brainstorm. They love to brainstorm. Again, brainstorming may feel icky to some people, but again, switching our lingo and our language so that it attracts the other person, although it may bore us. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes perfect sense, Dreesy. I mean, before I approach, you know, a team member or colleague with a problem or issue, make it sound attractive to them so that they want to help you or that they want to be a collaborative partner in that way. So thank you for that, Dreesy. And I also have a comment that was submitted anonymously. This person says, it still never hurts to communicate. That way everyone can know what's going on. I guess that's my structural side saying that, but it doesn't hurt to let other people know what you have in mind, especially when you are on the same team.
Oh, of course. Completely agree, because Just like how I say in Myers-Briggs world, there's no right or wrong, no better or worse. It's the same thing with this. There's no right or wrong or better or worse thinking preference, right? They all have their strong points. And then, of course, maybe they all have their blind spots, like we saw at the beginning of the session, where analytical thinkers may come across as denying emotion, or social thinkers may come across as being too emotional. So they may have their blind spots or, areas of improvement, but there is no better or worse. And we need all of them, right, to be able to succeed 100%. So I completely agree that communication is so important. And because you'll be able to get all of the thoughts out on the table. The analytical mind can give you the data, the conceptual can give you awesome ideas, the social can remember the people, how are we feeling about this, who's going to be affected. And then the structural thinker can say, but here are the details. The structural thinker is going to say, I hear y'all talking, but I'm about to create an outline of the details and we're going to be set. So yes, I completely agree with that. Communication is key. So again, this was what makes each attribute feel scratchy, how to embrace the scratchy, and then how to speak to different attributes is this last piece that I wanted to share with you. And so this probably goes hand in hand too with Brianna's question. When she's saying, how can I step outside of my thinking preference and maybe talk to others? Here's another tool. So when speaking to the analytical brain, this is what you might say. Let's cut to the chase. What's the bottom line? What's the cost and benefit ratio? Let's explore this subject in depth. That's what you may want to say when talking to an analytical thinker, because they want small talk to be limited. So maybe suggest alternatives to analyze and choose from, limit small talk, get to the point, speak concisely, document theory with facts. And then I put bluff, which is bottom line up front. I remember that I went to grad school with a lot of soldiers. And so when we were doing projects, I would see BLUF in capital letters, and I'm like, y'all, what is that? And they would say it's the bottom line up front. That's what an analytical thinker wants. They want the bottom line up front. They don't want the fluff. Just get to the facts. So this is what some of what you could say to an analytical thinker. A conceptual thinker, this is what you might say to them. Let's not rein ourselves in. How does this connect to the vision? This has the right flow. Can we be globally assigned? And so again, like I mentioned to Brianna, you can brainstorm with them. They love brainstorming. Use metaphors with them. Give the picture and skip the details. They don't care about the details. They love the big picture. They love coming up with ideas, experimenting, brainstorming. Allow for digressions with them because they're ideating, right? They're thinking about all of these ideas. So be patient with them and allow for digressions with them, and be loose with them. They don't like to feel so structured and tight. They want to feel loose and free. For the social thinker, when really speaking to the social brain, this is something that you might say. This is not the end all be all, of course, but you might say, how do you feel about this? How will this affect your customers? Let's work through this together. I'm hurt you haven't returned my phone call from yesterday. So again, they care about the feelings of people. They want to work with others. Collaboration, they love to collaborate. And so lighten up, right? Be sensitive and really open to the fact that a social thinker is going to care about the feelings. They're going to care about their feelings, people's feelings, and just people in general. They really sincerely care about how people are going to be affected in general. So structural brain, this is what you might say to a structural brain. We've always done it this way. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Slow down. Let's take this one step at a time. Or what does the policy say? So for a structural brain, give lots of details, be formal and traditional as well with them. So hopefully this also helped and gave us all ideas of how we can confront or speak to someone who has a different way of thinking and prefers to think. Any questions right now, Bree?
No, not at this time, Dreesy. You can keep going.
Okay, what I want to do, so again, we talked about the 4 thinking preferences, and then we talked about the intent impact gap, right? An example of that and how to minimize the intent impact gap. What I want to do is go back and have you all describe your mind. So again, you were able to see the list at the beginning of the session. So you saw the yellow list, the blue list, the red list, and the green list. Some of you all have various colors. I want you to describe your mind, right? So if you were just jotting down things that you feel like describes your mind, describes your thinking preference, and how you like to navigate on a day-to-day basis. I want you to write down or jot down quickly your likes, dislikes, triggers, frustrations, motivations, and a motto. If you have a motto for yourself and just what you would say, this is how I like to get down, this is how I like to navigate on a day-to-day. And I'll give you all a few minutes to just jot down whatever's coming to your mind. And then if you can place them in the chat, and then Brianna is going to read those off. So just giving you all a few minutes to do that. And Brianna, you just let me know when we have any responses.
I will go ahead and toss myself to the wolves and put myself out there. So my likes, I like to know what's going on with my teammates personally, and not to be a pest or to get more involved in their personal lives than I have to, but it just allows me to know how I should approach that person. If it's something that I need help with, knowing what's going on in their, day to day on the ride here, I can know how to approach that person and how to treat that person throughout the day. They may not want to be bothered with my, 1,000,001 questions or me asking them to look at this for grammatical errors. So I do like to know what's going on. And, like I said, that could be as simple as, how was your ride? How was your commute to work? How was it dropping off your kids at school today? Was it rough? Was it, pretty easy? My dislikes, I think that's a hard one. Dislikes, I don't know. I have to come back to that one, Dreesy. Yeah. My triggers, not having structure, not having a list, not having a plan. I think those are my triggers. And that also leads to a lot of my frustration. Mm-hmm. I also, my motivation would be teamwork. Mm-hmm. I think that motivates me and that energizes me in the workplace. And then my motto, it would be, to-do list saves lives. That would be my motto.
I like it.
And Dreesy, we do have some comments from the audience, ma'am, but go ahead.
I said thank you. Thank you for going out there and going first.
We have Connie. She has said her likes are opening up, being with other people. Her dislikes, feeling left out. Frustration if someone doesn't take the time to get to know me. And her motivators are helping others.
Connie is social, I bet.
Connie, please let us know if that
Connie's
is
a social
correct.
Thinker, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, and Mike said his motto is just do it.
Ooh, I wonder if he is structural or analytical. Anywho, y'all, I love this stuff, so I like trying to guess what y'all are, so y'all let me know. Maybe more people are placing it in the chat, but let me share a few other things with you all in terms of each preference in their question, right? So analytical minds ask why. Conceptual minds ask what if. The structural mind is going to ask how. And the social mind is going to ask who. So let's say we had 4 people who are coming to buy a new product, right? Let's say we had a conceptual thinker, a social thinker, analytical thinker, and a structural thinker. So again, the analytical thinker is the natural skeptic. They're going to be looking at reviews and valid sources if they're trying to buy this new product. The conceptual thinker, they're going to stand in line for this new product and they're going to know they want it by their gut. The structural thinker, they don't want to buy it new, but because it's broken, they have to. And so they're probably going to replace it with the exact same model. They are our, if it ain't broke, they're not going to fix it type people. And lastly, is social. That's right. They're asking the questions who. They're probably going to get someone to they're going to want to work with others. They're going to call someone to help them install it, or they're going to have someone come over and help them install it. They want to work with people. They want to collaborate. So just wanted to give you those questions of the why, what if, how, and who. Typically what each thinking preference asks. Anything else, Brianna, in the chat?
Yes, ma'am. I do want to let you know that Connie said she is social, so you were right on that one. And we have some more people that have submitted their responses as far as describing their mind. Just let me get back to it. So we have another they like structure, order, clear communication. Their dislikes are chaos, nebulous communication, triggers, confusion disorder, frustrations, not communicating what you want from me. He or she's motivators are teamwork, clear communication, a job well done, and the group motto would be work smarter, not harder. And we have structural and analytical. They said that they are closely aligned with those two thinking preferences. Yep. And Connie's motto is the more the merrier. That's that social coming out.
I like it. Okay, great. Great. Brianna, were there any other questions? If we want to do a discussion or chat?
No, we don't have any questions right now. So I will close, and if there are any that comes in as I am speaking, I will be sure to let you know before we end the call.
Well, let me ask this one question as we close, and it's just start, stop, and continue. I want to ask them, what is one thing that they feel that they'll start, stop, and continue as it relates to this topic of cognitive diversity? So we have all of these perceptions coming to the table, right? All of these thinking preferences coming to the table. And if we want to be successful in this world, we have to accept this melting pot of perception. So what is one thing that you will start, stop, and continue as it relates to this topic of cognitive diversity? I just want to get some of their responses, Bree, and then we can close out.
You got it.
And as they're placing their responses, if we do get any in the chat, I will say that today we literally only touched the surface. Really, we skimmed the surface. And so if you're ever interested in learning more about emergenetics for yourself, or maybe for your team or your organization, please contact us at the Leadership Institute, and you would actually be able to take the emergenetics profile. If you haven't, I do realize that some people have, but if you haven't, you would actually be able to take the emergenetics profile and again get a profile that'll show you items and pictures similar to what you saw for that Sarah and Chris example. Because today what you did is you self-selected, and so you self-selected what you felt was most like you in terms of the list that I presented to you all. But again, the actual emergenetics assessment will allow you to get more detailed information on who you are in terms of your thinking preferences and your behavior attributes. Okay, anything, Bree?
Thank you, Dreesy. Connie says that she will ask others, what do they need from me?
Good.
And thank you again for joining us today. I want to let you know that we will make the recording of this presentation available on our Facebook page within 48 hours of the event. If you want us to email this information to you as far as the presentation, enter your email address into the chat, and I will make sure that I send that your way by the end of this business week. As always, we are interested in your feedback, so please take a few minutes to complete our post-event survey. You can access it via QR code or a bit.ly link. Join us for our next webinar. It will be at 11 a.m. on Wednesday, April the 28th. It will be with our Executive Director and Assistant Vice President of Leadership Development at Columbus State University, Shayna Young. She will discuss managing emotional labor and how to avoid burnout, which I am sure is a topic that all of us are interested in as we deal with this roller coaster of emotions and returning back to work and things of that that nature. So on behalf of the Leadership Institute, thank you for all of your questions and engagement. If you have any topic ideas around disruptors in the workplace, or want additional information on how we can be of service to you, email us at leadershipinstitute@columbusState.edu. And that is all for our time today. So again, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you next time.